This is Carrie Johnson with the Iowa Department of Management. And what we're going to do today is provide a first step in a series of webinars to discuss tax increment financing and the administration of TIF in the local government valuation finance system. So, the system that county auditors will use to submit valuation to Department of Management. Just a little background on TIF is what we're going to do, and then also some highlights of those parts in the system that you use to administer tax increment financing when you submit your valuations. So this first part is part one, and it's going to be primarily just an introduction and some background. There are 5 parts to this brief webinar series. So again, we're going to start with tax increment financing basics just to familiarize you as the user with TIF in general. This is not meant to be an exhaustive discussion of TIF. It's just to highlight some key points, introduce you to some terms, and make sure that you have just a real basic understanding. So first of all, of course, what is TIF? TIF is tax increment financing, and it's a method of reallocating property tax revenues that are a result of an increase in valuation above a base valuation figure. Tax revenues produced by property tax levies imposed on that increased valuation by all levy authorities are allocated back to the TIF authority to repay debt they incurred to make projects happen in the urban renewal area. There are some exceptions to this diverted revenue. Debt service levies still go to the original tax authority, as well as school PEPL, which is physical plant and equipment levy, and ISL, which is instructional support levy. Those 2 levies still go to the school that imposed them, not to the TIF authority on that increased revenue generated by TIF. So essentially, what TIF is doing is a levy authority would say, okay, we want to develop or rehabilitate a particular area within our borders. We're going to go through the steps to create an urban renewal plan, which we'll talk about in a minute. We're going to pass a TIF ordinance, which we'll also touch on. And we're going to do some things in the area that would incur debt on our part. So infrastructure, enter into agreements or what have you. We're going to incur debt in order to make some development or rehabilitation happen. And then when that area increases in property value, we as the TIF authority are going to capture the increased revenue on that increased value in order to repay us for our investment that we made and our debt we incurred in order to make those projects happen. That's in general the way TIF is intended to work. So who can undertake TIF? Cities and counties undertake TIF under Chapter 403. Community colleges did under Chapter 260E. And rural improvement zones, which are private lake developments, so a pretty narrow focus of TIF usage, that's covered in Chapter 357H. So, urban renewal process. So, again, a city or county that wants to utilize these powers would first adopt an urban renewal plan. They're going to look at Chapter 403 if we're talking about a city or county, and that's going to be our focus. That's where most of the TIF authority and activity happens, is under Chapter 403. And it requires a resolution of necessity. Basically, this city or county that wants to do the TIF process, urban renewal process, would have to state within their plan that the area is slum or blight, and they want to eliminate slum or blight, or it is economic development, so they want to generate economic development in the area, and that rehabilitation or development is in the best interests of the public. So they have to indicate what is going on in this area, or what do they want to do with this area, and that the actions they want to take are in the best interests of the public. They would identify the boundaries. So what are the physical boundaries of this area? They would identify plan objectives and projects. And then the plan itself, if they have a planning commission, they would need to submit that plan to their planning commission locally. They would have to provide notice and hold a public hearing on their urban renewal plan. And they do have to have a consultation with affected levy authorities. So, for instance, a city undertaking this process would consult with the affected county and school district, have a meeting in a sense, but the county or school district would have no veto power over the pursuit of this plan. It's basically an informational consultation. There are some boundary restrictions. Cities operate within city limits, of course. They can also operate within the 2-mile area that's outside the city if the county consents to that process. Counties would operate in the area outside the 2-mile area that surrounds the city. They can also operate within the 2-mile area or even within the city if agreed to by the city. So, for instance, if the city and county are undertaking a joint project, potentially the county could operate within the city limits if the city and county agree that that's the best way to pursue this particular project. Ag land restrictions, slum or blighted areas cannot include ag land. Economic development economic development areas cannot include ag land or century farmland unless the owner agrees. So if the property owner that owns the ag land is on board with the development of a particular area that's currently classed as ag land, it certainly can be included in the area if it's an economic development area. So the TIF authority would adopt this urban renewal plan that sort of sets the general premise and the general area under which these activities would take place. After adoption of the area, the city or county would adopt an ordinance to initiate tax increment financing. So the ordinance basically sets the stage for division of revenue. So it's basically taking a look at this general area and saying, okay, within this particular area that we define by ordinance, this is where we're going to divide revenue should there be an increase in valuation. Urban renewal plans and TIF ordinances can be amended, rescinded, changed, etc. at any time during the process, and oftentimes they are. So just keep in mind that as a county receiving documents from a city, you want to just have an understanding of what you're looking at when you're receiving it. Are you receiving documentation on an amendment to an existing plan? Is this a whole new plan? Is this an amendment to an ordinance? Make sure you're just reviewing the documents that you receive and have an understanding of what they represent. So a TIF authority, of course, would initiate projects. That's the goal of an urban renewal area, is that there's either an intent to eliminate slum or blight or to generate economic development, which is for the good of the general public. So they would typically initiate projects, and that might take the form of infrastructure, putting in streets, sewer, that sort of thing. It could be economic development, loans and grants. That's, sort of the steps that we're taking in order to generate increased value in the area, bring in a business, help a business expand, that sort of thing. Or it could be slum and blight elimination, so perhaps removal of dilapidated structures. So in undertaking these projects, the TIF authority would incur debt. So that could take the form of a rebate or developer agreement with a local business, or a business that wants to come into the area, an agreement to rebate them some of their taxes over a certain number of years, something of that nature. It could be an internal loan, whereas, say, a city would borrow from their general fund in order to undertake certain projects, do some street work, that sort of thing, and then they intend to repay that loan with TIF revenue. or it could take the form of traditional bonds and notes. So that could be TIF revenue. They could be issued as TIF revenue, which they would be repaid with TIF revenue. And that would be their main form of payment. They could also be, and oftentimes are, general obligation debt that they intend to repay with TIF revenue, but could be repaid with traditional debt service if need be. So sunsets or end dates, slum and blight designations have no statutory end date, no statutory sunset. Economic development plans, they would get 20 years of TIF revenue. For newer plans, just meaning anything adopted after January 1 of 1995. So most plans that have been that are still on the books would be 20-year plans, right? Unless they're significantly older and still in place. With this 20-year plan, since it was 1995, just keep in mind that some of these may be nearing expiration. So you want to make sure that you're aware of the potential end dates for the plans within your area, and that you're planning accordingly, just meaning, have you had a discussion with the cities, for instance, within your county, and is everybody sort of, do they have the same understanding of an end date? Just kind of get on the same page with folks. Economic development for non-LMI, meaning non-low and moderate income housing. So economic development that's just for traditional housing that's not intended for low and moderate income folks. Those have a time limit of 10 or 15 years conditional. So there can be situations where they could have a 15-year time frame if for instance, the county would agree, if it's a city housing development project, the county would agree to an additional 5 years in those instances where it serves a smaller population area. So as part of the TIF calculation or determination of TIF revenue generated, you need to have something you're comparing to, right? Well, if we're looking at growth, what are we basing that growth on? And that's when the term frozen base year comes into play. So the frozen base year is essentially, what are we comparing the potential growth to in order to calculate what the increase in valuation might be. So the frozen base year for those ordinances, TIF ordinances that you see now, basically, anything that was adopted after January 1 of 1995. The frozen base year is the valuation on January 1 of the calendar year prior to the year in which TIF indebtedness is first certified with the county auditor. So for those TIF ordinances, the certification of debt by the TIF authority is what really sets that frozen base year. And that would, establish the first year revenue is generated and received, and that 20-year clock in this example. TIF ordinances that are older, they were adopted prior to January 1, 1995. The frozen base value is the valuation on January 1 of the calendar year prior to the year in which the TIF ordinance was adopted. So those had a frozen base year that was set in a little bit different manner, not triggered by the certification of TIF debt. But any that you see come into play now would be triggered by that first certification of TIF debt. Keep in mind, though, if it's an amendment to an existing plan for that area that's amended into by the plan and amended into the area, those parcels, for instance, the frozen base year would be the January 1 of the calendar year prior to the year in which the ordinance is passed to amend that particular piece. So it is a little bit different if we're talking about an amendment to an existing area. TIF debt certification, really what we're talking about here is, obviously a city or county has initiated the plan, they passed an ordinance, and we said in order to receive TIF revenue, you have to incur debt that you need repaid with TIF revenue. So there has to be a communication of that debt. So that's when we talk about certifying TIF debt. And this is a communication from the TIF authority to the county, and it has to take place by December 1. The county completes a TIF reconciliation form and would send that to the TIF authorities as soon as possible after December 1. So the TIF authority tells the county, okay, this is the debt we have, this is what needs to be repaid. And then each year, the county would complete a reconciliation form that says, okay, I understand what you're saying. This is what we show you've received for revenue in the past for this debt. This is what we anticipate you would receive in TIF revenue for this debt in the current year, and what we are estimating for the budget year we're going to be going into. And so that way it gets the city, if we're talking about a city TIF authority, and the county on the same page as far as what is the total outstanding debt that is still owed on this particular project, on this particular debt instrument. It's, again, a communication tool. The reconciliation form is a communication tool. The county auditor provides TIF taxes without further certification. So the TIF authority would not certify each year by December 1. They would certify that debt initially, and then they could certify in future years for that particular debt if they say want to request fewer taxes than what is actually owed on the debt. They want to structure it in a particular way, or they want to decertify some of that debt. And in other words, say, okay, well, we actually paid some of this debt that I originally certified from another source, so I need to communicate that to the county auditor and say, okay, this debt is actually less than what we initially certified. Or, of course, if they have additional debt that needs to be repaid, they would certify that debt as well. The certification and reconciliation forms are found on the Department of Management website. You can find them by going to dom.iowa.gov/counties. And this is just an example of what the form looks like. It is an Excel form that you can download onto your machine. This is a reconciliation form, and you can use that form as you communicate to your TIF authorities. And again, we're starting out talking about this because the communication regarding TIF debt is crucial and absolutely necessary to understand what debt is owed and how you as a county would administer your valuation in order to get that TIF debt repaid. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me by phone or by email. Thank you.